So Dr. Larkin is familiar to all of us as one of the wonderful organizers of this conference, but since we're going to hear from his scholarship, I'll tell you more about his scholarly background. He is professor of 17th through 19th century European art here at Montana State University, Bozeman, where he teaches in the undergraduate and graduate art history programs. He has published on aspects of early modern French and American art with a threefold interest in portrait patronage and mythical permutations of Queen Marie Antoinette, the transatlantic political culture of French and American governments, and the trans-Pacific philosophical culture of Chinese and Japanese migrants. His most recent book, co-written with Stephen Little, is a catalog for the forthcoming Northeastern Asia and the Northern Rockies exhibition, Brooklyn Punctum Books 2022 and 23, which is underwritten by a grant from the Henry Luce Foundation and opens at the Yellowstone Art Museum in April of next year. Today, Dr. Larkin will share a talk entitled California Cornucopia, Deconstructing William Hahn's Hybrid Market Scene, Sansom Street, San Francisco, 1872. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Larkin.
I'm glad to be here, and I'm also very happy to have spent time in Sacramento in the summer to look at European art that represents or claims to represent Chinese in San Francisco. In a brief account of the cultural life of San Francisco, a reporter for the Overland Monthly singled out the German painter Karl Wilhelm Hahn as among the city's most prominent artists, deserving of praise. He observed several careful studies Hahn has made of Chinese street scenes and interiors reveal an element of picturesqueness in San Francisco, which he is the first artist to use. He realizes such scenes with all the pains of the German school, yet does not lose the rich effects of light and color peculiar to this locality. The true artist will find good subjects near at hand, and such subjects, rightly treated, appeal to the public with all the force of novelties, end quote. The art critic conveys that Hahn has managed to use his talents as a genre painter to make the Chinese inhabitants of San Francisco look picturesque in their living environment. At the same time, he identifies an interesting dilemma particular to the German artist in the painting of cityscapes or genre scenes in San Francisco during the second half of the 19th century. Modern subjects are best taken from the city streets in one's immediate vicinity with sensitivity to the appearance of inhabitants and the conditions of environment. Yet they must be rendered in a way that will appeal to a bourgeois public inclined to inspect all manner of curiosities and to prominent businessmen intent on reinforcing their status as a governing elite. This paper seeks to excavate Hahn's visual stimuli in San Francisco in the early 1870s as a prelude to constructing a large hybrid cityscape genre piece entitled Market Scene, Sansom Street, San Francisco for public consumption. Hahn trained at the art schools of Dresden and Dusseldorf, specialized in painting dramatic horse-drawn carts and lively human interactions that found receptive audiences and buyers in New York and San Francisco long before he set foot in America. Once he opened a studio in San Francisco, he inevitably confronted the suitability of his academic approach to rendering people at work amid the lush countryside was suited to representing the local produce market. He chose to highlight the dominant European immigrants at center and to include East Asian migrants and a black freedwoman on the periphery, creating interesting juxtapositions of and dialogues between those of different classes, races, and genders, which inevitably forces the beholder to question the nature of the notion of community in California during the postbellum period. Trained at the Venerable Royal Academy of Arts at Dresden, which emphasized drawing skills necessary for promoting classical idealism in history paintings on a grand scale in the mid-1840s, Hahn preferred to specialize in genre scenes because he was familiar with life in the countryside and had no trouble selling these small works. Redirected to the new Kunstakademie in Dusseldorf, which embraced genre painting rooted in the Dutch tradition in 1854, Hahn approached composition as an organized sequence of forms arranged 45 degrees to the picture plane. Usually a farmer guides a pair of horses pulling a wagon heaped with hay, and often colorized as a delicate balance of warm and cool colors, largely earth tones, blue, green, ochre, and russet. He invites the spectator to enter by following a dog along a road and identify with the daily struggles of rural folk. It was not long before the Dusseldorf School became famous for quality landscapes and genre pieces, thanks to regular exhibition and sale of works in the 1840s to 1860s. Taking advantage of Dusseldorf's satellite gallery in New York City, Hahn began to send works to shows there and gradually expanded their exposure to Boston and San Francisco. So it's possible for German painters to show their works from the East Coast to the West. Encouraged by steady sales and a new friendship with American landscape painter William Keith and his wife Elizabeth, Hahn and the Keiths traveled to the United States in the fall of 1871, shared a studio in Boston for 6 months, and then moved on by train to establish an atelier in San Francisco in late spring of 1872. Assisted by prominent painters of the community, Hahn and Keith had no difficulty establishing studios in the Mercantile Library building at 216 Bush Street, just 1 block north of Market Street, sometime in August 1872. The Mercantile Library building had been constructed 2 years earlier at the order of a civic group. The presence of shops on the ground floor, a library on the main floor, and the artist studios in the garret can be explained by the common institutional practice of bolstering revenue by renting out space to businesses and professionals. The street possessed other amenities: the Brooklyn Hotel, the Necktie Factory, a restaurant, an omnibus service, cabs, and street lighting. Hahn's studio was fortuitously located near the intersection of Bush and Sansome Streets. The omnibus of the one carried passengers from east to west, while the omnibus of the other carried them south to north. Much of the steep topography from the port to the surrounding hill districts was thus at his command. It was not the broad cityscape viewed from atop a hill that interested him, however, but the intermittent spectacle of peoples converging on the farmers' market running along Sansome Street between Clay and Broadway. The juncture at Sansome and Clay is significant because towering corporate structures line the way to Market Street in the south, which would be the far slide there, obviously taken from Stereoscope, and modest shops, artisanal works, and factories to Vallejo Street in the north, over here on the right, okay? Before being consumed by the Gray Brothers quarry on Telegraph Hill. This intersection presented him the opportunity to observe farmers of the Mission and Presidio districts jostling with each other to locate a spot along the curb to unload produce directly on the cobblestones for what was one of the largest markets in the city. Hahn was seeking to impress the city's art and cultural establishment with market scene Sansome Street, San Francisco. A virtual California cornucopia of retail prosperity and rural abundance, many locals would find flattering and collectors like to believe typical of city life. He selected an unusually large 5 by 8 foot canvas, ensuring that the beholder standing directly before it would be impressed by the telescopic effect and overwhelmed by the fusion of cityscape, genre, and still life conventions, all painted in glorious Dusseldorfian detail. How did he put the scene together? Well, Hahn's stock motif of a horse-drawn wagon viewed from an angle or along a downward slope against generalized country scenery has been abandoned for farmers arriving and hitching their horses and unloading their teeming wagons in a funnel of activity that commences just prior to the Sansome-Clay intersection and fades all the way to the base of Telegraph Hill. I think you can see that hill beyond the plume of smoke in the distance. The moment of the day chosen has been identified in many catalogs as morning, though the shadows cast indicate to me that the sun was just west of center and thus may indicate early afternoon. The first thing we note is how precisely the street has been rendered, possibly with the aid of a photograph, according to one-point perspective, including the placement of single and double-storied buildings, narrow sidewalks, and a broad basalt pavement incorporating rails along orthogonals that converge at the base of Telegraph Hill to serve as a setting for the market. Second, the attention we direct to a pair of horses waiting patiently on the tracks at center while the horse car approaches from behind, and with a full load of passengers, then the attention the prospective buyers and sellers direct to the produce laid out in the street rather than to the items arranged in the store windows suggests that the farmer's market temporarily disrupts the established transport and business. Third, the multiple human and animal interactions can be split into two roughly pyramidal groups. In the broad sun illuminating a produce store on the right, a farmer leans forward with a menacing gaze and raises his fist at 3 boys filling 2 burlap sacks with produce liberally spread on the pavement. Another farmer, perched on an empty cart, accompanied by his wife, distributes floral posies to two women. More growers arrive with produce and take their time setting up their stalls. In the shadow of the seed store at left, a yeoman attempts to maneuver his teeming cart into position without disturbing the neat baskets of turnips, beets, and peppers, sacks of potatoes, and other root vegetables laid out by another farmer. Well-to-do city folk inspect the produce and declare their preferences, conscious of being seen not just by hopeful farmers within the narrative, but also by curious viewers without. Fourth, the integration of a variety of study details from the carefully labeled and relabeled paper warehouse at middle left and porcelain emporium at middle right, you can't see it here, but you will again, to the unfurling heads of lettuce and sliced melons in the foreground, left and right, betrays a paradoxical obsession with mapping a district and artfully arranging food. Again, very Dusseldorfian. And what of those minorities subsisting on the periphery? Elizabeth Johns has summarily observed that a panoply of social classes appears in the image. On the far left, a stylishly dressed woman with a measured air has brought her children to the market. On the far right are Chinese truck farmers. On the far left is an African-American woman. In the right foreground are street urchins who snitch from the display, and gathered here and there on the right side of the picture are groups of working men. In population, at least, she says, this is a representative gathering. Just how representative can be assayed from the census data of 1870, which shows that the 1st and 3rd districts, linked by Sansome and bounded by Kearny Street on the west, California Street on the south, and Market Street, San Francisco Bay on the east, had a total population of 13,731 inhabitants, of which 93% were white, 6% were Chinese, and less than 1% were black. Hahn's inclusion of at least 28 men or boys and 7 women or girls of pale complexion and Western attire speaks to the dominant European demographic, while 2 to 4 men with exaggeratedly slanted eyes and Far Eastern dress represent the Asian population, and a single woman with dark skin and Southern, quote-unquote, coiffure, the black population. The racial minorities on the sidewalks are sometimes in dialogue with, at other times in juxtaposition with, white farmers in the street. Either way, they operate within a society and economy that presumes their marginality. We observe that both the Chinese men and the black woman engage with the market in different ways. Whereas one of the Chinese men is selling vegetables to passers-by from open double harvesting baskets suspended from a shoulder pole, the black woman is buying select items from a vendor to be consigned to her personal shopping basket. The 2 men are detached from each other physically and psychologically. One intently plies his vegetable trade on the fringe of the market, and the other squats outside the greengrocer and contemplates the noisy spectacle in the street. Both men wear traditional long shirts, hanfu, with diagonal button black or dark gray trousers, hu, white socks, and cloth shoes, xia, perhaps suggesting that they are from the same province, Guangdong. However, one wears a broad-brimmed straw hat suggestive of work in the fields, while the other wears a black skull cap connoting indoor activity. In this instance, their relationship to the farmers is one of juxtaposition, as they serve as a secondary force for the cultivation of the most labor-intense crops, maybe even privately in their own back gardens. In contrast, the woman holds the gaze of a farmer perched on a wagon from which he vends his vegetables. Her hair is contained in a neatly tied scarf, her ears are adorned with gold loops, and her body is wrapped with a blouse and skirt overlaid with a shawl and apron. She has carefully filled her basket with turnips, green onions, and the like. The attire and activity suggest a cook or maid in search of the finest ingredients for her clients or family. Her relationship with the farmer is one of dialogue about a choice item. Appreciating the effort made to render the street accurately, the market animatedly, and the vegetables enticingly, we must consider whether the figures were translated into representative ethnic types or individual characters, consistent with so many life studies. Are we looking at temperaments or portraits? The tan farmers with mustaches and beards seem to be cut from the same mold, which one of the early curators equated with Italian heritage, registering the presence of French, Portuguese, and Italian farmers in the area. Likewise, the mother and children, pausing along the sidewalk, betray, can I say, a supercilious reserve that is closer to English middle-class propriety, perhaps, The ragamuffins scrambling to snag discards refer to the tough lot, perhaps, of recent German and Irish immigrants. I would say that Han has represented the Chinese vegetable carrier and squatter as an ethnic type rather than distinct individuals. He gives them an impression of supple youth and placid expression, suggesting a lack of familiarity with the daily grind and constant ostracism of a migrant's life in the West. Indeed, archival photographs of Chinese produce peddlers in San Francisco provide a sense of both the incredible physical stamina required to carry such a load and the emotional range particular to each individual, from curious to indifferent, cordial to exasperated. The few photos of men crouching against a building generally suggest a desire to show deference to elders or authorities or to rest apart from the fray. So I would argue that the painter did not study the Chinese migrants with any depth of understanding, but perpetuated a trope, perhaps, of quiet passivity. And this perhaps relates to Xi Zhang's paper yesterday about the Chinese figure, whether the figures represented belong to a familiar type. What is the extent of that typology? I would really love to know. In contrast, Han has rendered the African-American customer with a vibrant presence and darting gaze suggestive of independent thought and volition. Unfortunately, archival photos of black women in San Francisco are rare, and those that do exist are bound up with the domestic roles of wife and servant. Han shows us no ordinary wife or servant, but a self-possessed entity, so we must consider that he may have achieved a portrait. Mabel Eleanor Phillips, an early 20th century San Franciscan, who penned a recollection of Market Street in the 1860s for the Grizzly Bear, Circular, recognized this woman as Chloe, a 40-year-old second cook employed by the Hotel Peerless. One of the daily duties of Chloe, she attested, was a trip to Sansom Street to do the marketing. Sometimes she took an Irish girl named Alice Farrington with her on the errand. But in all of her trips, she carried a large basket in which were placed choice bits of produce, not to be delivered, not to be found in the great vegetable and fruit wagons. Although Chloe was, by Philip's account, a woman of sunny temperament who endeared herself to all who knew her, Han portrays her with a serious, perhaps weary expression, as if attempting to hold the farmer to his promise. Next week, I will have the special shallots, or something of that nature. Why did Han invest the Chinese workers with an exotic lyricism and placid temperament, and the black servant with muscular movement and assertive demeanor? Did he mean to suggest that minorities subsisting on the periphery of the city's economic and social networks negotiated their constraints in different ways? The quarrel between the white farmer and the rapscallions over the theft of produce, while a Chinese worker looks on almost amusedly, belies the fact that some whites actively lobbied against Chinese to own property to engage in farming or mining. The impatient way a mother and son attempt to gain the farmer's attention while the black cook rolls her eyes belies the fact that some whites continue to regard blacks as inferiors and to push in front of them. In other words, Han suggests that the white farmer had more to fear internally from poverty and ignorance than from Chinese and black hard work and determination. Furthermore, whereas white workers were prone to manhandle the little Chinese, one man rifles through the basket, another sits on a basket and kicks the ground. I can't tell if the squatter's queue has been cut. White wives tended to verbally infantilize black servants. For example, we know that the children staying at the Hotel Peerless referred to Chloe as Mammy rather than assistant cook. The San Francisco Press reported on Han's progress between the late winter and early autumn of 1872, which helped establish the artist's reputation and attract patrons in the city. In the October issue of the Overland Monthly, a reporter teased having made several careful studies of Chinese street scenes and interiors in a picturesque vein and in a spirited, truthful, painting of the gamins on Vallejo Street Wharf. Han is now engaged on a large market scene containing 30 figures, all drawn from life, a very animated and picturesque group. Han biographer Marjorie Arkelian has observed that a Chinese street scene and the farmer's market picture were exhibited at Snow and Roos art store at 21 Kearney Street, but I've not been able to substantiate this. Snow and Roos would be in the image, the photograph on the far left, and it would, from the corner building, it would be one to the right. I would like to think that Han, having spent so much time painting the market scene, provided locals an opportunity to view it, whether in his studio, the library, the art store, or an art association. Because Han exhibited mid-sized cabinet paintings, especially still lifes, at Snow and Roofs in 1872 to 1873, I find it plausible that he showed his big drawing room masterpiece there. Unfortunately, no direct images of Snow and Roofs survive, but we know from the city directory that it contains space for the display of pictures, frames, moldings, and artist materials. What did his peers and the public make of the market scene? A piece of art criticism survives which suggests that viewers were delighted by the sheer amount of activities and details, registering simply the market carts unloading, the street half blocked with piles of baskets and vegetables, the drivers and market men vociferating and swearing, the street Arabs fighting for stray carrots and turnips and other fruit, a general melee. It's a rather prosaic response, only the hardiest of shoppers should venture down to Sansom Street, is what it seems to suggest. We are closer to an art critic's point of view, I think, when we compare Han's work to that of his closest competitor in multi-figured genre in San Francisco. Karl Christian Nahl was also born in Germany, I should say the German states, and lived in the same neighborhood of San Francisco. The young Dusseldorf painter was sometimes compared with the older Castle practitioner, with the result that the former's muted earth tones were pronounced more appropriate to vignettes of country life, overland journeys, hard labor, and farmers' markets than the latter's high-keyed colors and dramatic light-dark contrasts to energize scenes of hunters, prospectors, and pioneers. Han's Indians, quietly following a mountain bend, and Chinese sprinkling water before oxen pulling redwood trees are more convincing than Nahl's dynamic Indian buffalo hunt and Mexican steer roping on the plains. The former maintained a thoughtful distance from human figures that the latter was only too willing to ascribe, heroic, predatory characteristics, however you want to look at it. For Han, the sale of an 8-foot painting that celebrated his rural roots and academic training offered the prospect of garnering a high price that would set him up for some time. Not long after the picture's completion, the artist sold it to Judge Edwin Bryant Crocker, railroad investor and art collector, for the then large sum of $2,500. Why did Crocker find it appealing? Compelled by a stroke to retire from the court bench, he spent his mature years traveling to northeastern America and Western Europe to collect paintings for his home at the corner of 3rd and Oak Streets in Sacramento. For him, Han represented one of the best exponents of the Dusseldorf Kunstakademie, which he toured while passing through the German states. Additionally, Crocker was among the men who profited from the gold rush, reaped dividends from railroad investments, and filled the state administrative positions. Over time, they all came to regard themselves as leaders of society with a moral responsibility to patronize civic works. Johns takes it a step further, speculating that Crocker was attracted to images of a booming economy because it fed the myth that capitalist expansion benefited all social classes by rewarding ready labor and ingenuity. In purchasing and displaying a Han painting, Crocker was able to promote to his well-set guests the notion that his shrewd investments continued to lift the poorest immigrants who were willing to work. In summary, this paper has investigated Karl Wilhelm Han's market scene with the aim of discovering how a German academic painter would have brought his rural experience and academic training to bear on an unusually large depiction of Bay Area white farmers descending on Sansom Street to interact with an authentic spectrum of urban workers and consumers in San Francisco, among which a migrant Chinese farmer and shop assistant and a free black cook or servant stand at the edge of the chaotic business. The painting, despite a variety of identifiable structures, lively movements, and detailed products, presents an unresolved dilemma on matters of race and class. First, whether to represent local inhabitants as ethnic types or authentic individuals, and second, whether to implicate these inhabitants in robust food exchange as a sign of social stability through economic growth. During his 6-year residency in California, Han learned that his skills could be employed to naturalize and homogenize the diverse, emancipated migrant and immigrant population for consumption by America's new elites. Given the increasing number of American artists attending art academies at home and abroad in the last quarter of the 19th century, we must continue to search for those forgotten Chinese and black painters who left their own representations of working conditions at the foot of the Golden Gate. Thank you.